Excellent. Look, good morning, everybody, and welcome to those in the chambers and online. It's 9 o'clock, and so we'll declare this morning's Performance Audit and Risk Committee open. Firstly, could I just ask if there are any apologies? I have received one from Councillor Ryan, but are there any others? No. So could I ask somebody move that we accept that? Moved by Mayor Kircher, seconded by Deputy Mayor Halale. All those in favour? Against? Thank you. That's carried. And now I'll just ask if there are any declarations of interest. There are none, so we'll get on with the meeting today. It's a very exciting meeting today, heavily audit laden. So I expect lots of good debate, and I know we have some of the auditors online ready to go, so we'll get to that soon. Just firstly, a bit of housekeeping. For public excluded today, we've only got the public excluded minutes from the previous PAR held on the 29th of July. I'll ask now if anybody wishes to speak to those, and if not, propose that we don't. I'll ask now if anybody wishes to speak. Well, thank you. It looks like Councillor McCohen's speaking in tongues. If anybody wants to speak to those, and if not, then I propose that we don't go into public excluded. Excellent. We'll progress with that then. So agenda item 3, confirmation of the previous meeting minutes. Does anybody wish to speak to those? Moved by Councillor Hopkins, seconded by Mayor Kircher. All those in favour? Against? Thank you, and again, that's carried. So we'll now move on to agenda item 4, and we'll kick off with 4.1, the audit report on findings from the LTP audit. And I'll hand over to Paul and Amanda to speak to that, please, with some input from the auditors as needed.
Okay, so attached to this report is the auditor's findings from the long-term plan audit. It includes both parts of the audit. The audit of the consultation document earlier in the year that started 11th of November was, we aimed to sign it off before Christmas, but we came back and ultimately signed it off at the start of February. And then the long-term plan audit that took place in May and was signed off on 30 June. The fee will be discussed in a separate paper, but in terms of the key matters that have been identified in this report from the auditors, I'm guessing Derek wants to speak to it, but the main points, key matters are identified on page 14 of the report. And the main things to point out are basically what was identified in the audit opinion, emphasis of matter around the uncertainty of the water services delivery. Obviously, we've made a different decision since the 30 June, what was adopted in 30 June. So we'll revisit the LTP dependent on the outcome of our water services delivery plan with how it's received by the DIA. And the other one was about the third-party funding on Network Waitaki Sports and Network Waitaki Event Centre. So we put some extra narrative in there to emphasise that that funding was still due, and it wasn't all tight, like it wasn't all contractually obliged or anything like that. So there's still a lot of fundraising and things to do for that. So that's been highlighted throughout the long-term plan and in the auditor's report. And there's anything else that you aren't aware of already in terms of the long-term plan audit? Pass over to Derek.
Morning, Simon. Morning, committee members. Yes, thank you for the opportunity also to comment on the report. It was a long process, and I think Amanda summarized quite well what the issues that we've identified through the long-term plan process. As she mentioned, we issued a qualified opinion on the consultation document regarding the accounting treatment of the Three Waters transfer to the CCO at that point in time. As she then also indicated, that was a council changed their view in terms of that treatment come the LTP stage, and that was corrected. But there were also 2 emphasis of matters as part of the CD stage, which was around the balanced budget. And again, council did a lot of work to mitigate the risk around the unbalanced budget, and that was reduced significantly. So come LTP stage, there was no longer an emphasis matter on the balanced budget, although there were still two emphasis of matters, one relating to the uncertainty around the water service delivery, as well as the uncertainty of a third-party funding, as Amanda mentioned. I think, yeah, I mean, I think that is probably the key areas of the report. We did go into a bit of detail in terms of the key focus areas that we had throughout the audit and what the key focus areas were. A lot of work went into the financial model. A lot of work went into the financial strategy, as again changes into the infrastructure strategy, as again there were changes recommended that came through from the CD stage, and those were then updated during the LTP stage, and we were finally comfortable with that. A lot of changes also with regards to the financial modeling, and all those changes that we did recommend were implemented. We did have ultimately 3 hot reviews that we needed to engage with the Office of the Auditor General. The last one being around the treatment of your intangible assets, and that we've highlighted in the report as well. So again, that will be a focus for our year-end audit, as you are investing a lot in digital technology and digital services. We will ensure that that complies with the relevant accounting standards, and that you are treating that appropriately where you are proposing to capitalize staff costs in developing those services. So that will be a focus for us as well. So I'll probably pause there in terms of the report and take any questions if there are any. Thanks, Simon.
Thanks, Derek. I'm sure there'll be lots of questions and conversation. I have just had, with regard to the Network Waitaki Event Centre, I have just had an update from Councillor Ryan this morning to say that at the project board meeting last week, they have been able to update it, and the funding gap is now much closer to 1 million than 4 million. So that is a good news story. I'm happy to open up the floor for questions or comments from people. Amanda's got one, Tim's got one, and then I've got one. Amanda?
I just wanted to clarify for that. There wasn't a funding gap. So we had, there was a listing of donors. There was just, it was not contractual, like there was nothing that we could provide the auditors. I just wanted to, for the public benefit, we don't have a funding gap.
My poor wording. Anyway, it's down to 1 million now instead of 4. Tim.
Thank you. Just a question for Derek. Your comments around the accounting treatment for intangible assets. I just wondered if you could elaborate on what you're going to be looking for in that space. You've mentioned, you know, the need to be compliant against IPSAS 31. So, just wondering if you could elaborate on that a little more.
Thanks, Tim. And just on that, so I was going to ask the same question. Derek, my simple understanding of this is that as auditors, you have some concerns with the way that council is proposing to capitalise the costs of staff associated with some of the digital asset upgrades, and you know, we talked about this in previous PARs with some of the forecast budgets, etc., for next year, and capitalisation of salaries and costs. So can you just talk us through that in a little bit more detail, and please let me know if I've got the wrong end of the stick.
No, not a problem. Yes, so the key criteria is that there needs to be staff cost that's identifiable, specifically relating to that project before it can be capitalized to that project. So there are certain criteria within IPSAS 31, the accounting standard, that specifies when certain costs can be capitalized or when they should be expensed. So it's almost, you have to follow a decision tree, and the criteria is quite specific when and under what circumstances you can capitalize those costs, whether it meets the criteria of being an intangible asset. So we go through that criteria, and during the LTP stage, council could not provide us with sufficient evidence to support the fact that it was relating to specific assets for the creation of an intangible asset at that point in time. So again, we'll go through that exercise as part of the year-end audit once they've identified specific assets and whether those assets meet the criteria for capitalization and the relevant costs in creating those assets.
And I note there on page 14, officers are confident the council approach will meet the criteria. Amanda, did you want to add to that?
Yes, I think it all comes down to evidence and timing. So we feel that after the fact, so when the auditors come in to audit the 30 June annual report, there'll be evidence there to support any items that we capitalise in the 30 June 25 financial year. It's quite hard looking forward 10 years when we're saying there'll be these capital projects down the line. So I think it was just it's the auditor's inability to obtain that evidence to satisfy them of those future projects, but looking forward, we're comfortable that it will be fine.
Okay, thank you. And I think we're talking about around about $3 million for the next financial year if we looked at the last budgets. All right. Any further questions? Councillor Hopkins.
Yeah, I think like you and Tim, I was going to ask some questions about IPSAS 31 and curious to know why officers were confident about meeting the test. But so thank you to Amanda for explaining that. A couple of other questions relating to the report. On page 13, we're told that Audit gave us a modified opinion on the consultation document due to the accounting treatment relating to the transfer of net assets to the water services entity. Transfer of net assets from the water services, from the Three Waters Department, was shown below the net profit within other comprehensive income, and the auditors felt that they should have been disclosed above the net profit. What I'm curious about is why wasn't, I mean, that must have been in the document at the outset. Why wasn't it changed straight away? I mean, why has there been a modified opinion when that could have been amended right from the beginning? Because we've got a separate report about how much reworking Audit had to do, and 18 hours on this and 130 something hours on other matters. One would have thought that if they'd spotted that early on, they could have said, hey, fix it. So I'm just curious, why did that not happen?
And we'll get to the hours in a little bit, but Amanda?
Yeah, so we did speak about this quite a lot at the time. Our main concern back when we were doing the consultation document audit was achieving the balanced budget. So when it hits the bottom line, our deficit was huge. We're talking like 330 million was the net effect that was hitting it was going to be a net loss of 330 million, and it looked completely insane. So we didn't want to go out to consult for that. We were trying to keep it as a separate item. And bearing in mind as well that the legislation still hadn't been set, we had no clear direction on what the accounting treatment was going to be. Under the previous legislation under Labor, it was a bit more clearer, and it was going to be below the line. So we thought that was a safe place to put it, and we disclosed that quite clearly in our consultation document. So we felt quite comfortable with that, and it was discussed with councillors at the time whether we wanted to make that move or we were happy keeping it where it was. Then we worked in between times after the consultation document went out. We actually engaged with some other councils to see what they were doing, and so we put it back up in line with the auditor's recommendation for the final long-term plan. So it's in the right place for the final long-term plan, and we feel that we disclosed it well at the consultation document stage.
Well, supplementary then, there's a couple of other questions, but my question then to Audit is, how reasonable is it to modify your opinion of our CD when, in fact, the explanation that you would have been given at the time is the one that I've just heard, which is that there was very little to go on. The only parliamentary signal was one from the previous government, not the current coalition government. Why effectively does by taking District Council consultation document get a modified audit opinion when in fact all of the factors that contributed to the concern you raised were generated by other agencies?
Chair, can I respond? Okay, so yes, so ultimately it was a disagreement between ourselves and council, as in terms of our view, there was clear guidance. The standard was explicit of how it needs to be treated. And yes, there was previous guidance, but that guidance was no longer applicable or relevant uh, since the new government came into place. And they didn't issue similar guidance to indicate that it should be treated the same way as it was previously. So all guidance that we received and our other councils were treating the same transaction was quite different to how Waitaki decided to treat it.
Okay, that kind of doesn't really line up with what Amanda's just said, that we went,
Well,
when we
and
spoke to
that's
our-
ultimately why it was qualified, because it ended up as a disagreement. Council didn't want to make the adjustment, and we had sufficient guidance, and the accounting standards were quite explicit in terms of how it needed to be treated. And as Amanda explained, they felt that from a community perspective, it wouldn't give the right picture. But from an accounting perspective, it is quite clear of how the transactions should have been treated.
Yeah, well, I'm quite comfortable that we did what was more digestible for our community than for accounting purposes, and so support what our finance team did at the time. But Mayor Kircher?
Took the words out of my mouth. I totally concur with that. It's it's consultation document is for the community. It's not for accountants sitting in Wellington or for bureaucracy sitting behind that. We need things, a document which people understand in our community. They're not all accountants, and the clearer we can make it for them, the better it is. So absolutely support us doing what we can to communicate well with our community.
A community of accountants. It's just that's thank you. Any other questions? Jim?
Yeah, I do have a couple more, just out of curiosity, Amanda or Paul, Alex, when will our, the LTP amendment that's referenced on page 14 actually happen? And I'm just, if we look at some of the material in the audit office report, can somebody just explain to me this notion of identifiability that was referenced on page 26 in regard to all the IT projects? What is this concern about whether the identifiability criteria was met?
Okay, so there's a couple of questions to unpack there. The first one being, I'm assuming with regard to the note on page 14 around due to the council's 8 July decision to exit Southern Waters. Well done. LTP finances will need to be revisited after an amendment prepared after the water services delivery plan. Amanda?
Yeah, so our thoughts are, we haven't made a concrete decision yet. Like the LTP still stands, and until we have had our water services delivery plan through the DIA and some feedback on that, we're kind of a little bit stuck in limbo. So we'll wait until that point, until we get direction from the DIA about what we should do, whether it's accepted or not, and only then will we know whether we need to amend our long-term plan. So that's, that's going to be September before we know that. So we're looking later in the year before we would start to prepare an LTP amendment. We just don't know what to change it to now. So until we've clearly decided a new direction on waters, we won't be amending the document.
And I think that that's an extremely prudent thing to do. I mean, any amendment that we do and any processes associated with that are going to cost money. And as we'll talk about later, every time we make a change, it seems to cost us a heck of a lot of money. So let's not spend it until we have to, and let's spend it efficiently when we're confident that we know the direction that we're heading. So I think that that's absolutely the way that we should be doing it. Your second question, Councillor Hopkins, was around identifiability of intangible assets, which kind of goes back to what we were talking about before, Amanda. We want to be able to capitalise staff costs associated with with digital builds. What Derek is saying is, well, you need to be able to see evidence that that's happening. Pretty hard to see evidence that that's happening out 10 years, but certainly within the next financial year, we should be able to do it. Amanda, Derek, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I guess there's the two elements. So our LTP initiatives listing, we obviously have a lot of the IT projects in there that are identifiable. And then there's identifying the staff time that has specifically gone into those as well. So there's a lot of detail like timesheet information and a resulting asset that we need to, that has to be identifiable to provide evidence to the auditors before they'll be satisfied that meets the criteria.
Also, maybe to add to that, we have had internal instances or instances with other council where they've tried to capitalize certain digitization projects, aerial photography as an example, and we've taken this through a process and those are regarded as not capital. So again, we need to evaluate each project on its merits and determine whether the criteria is met or not met before it can be capitalized, because we do have precedent of certain instances when it does not meet the criteria for capitalization.
Is there a materiality filter that you apply to that, Derek?
Yes, there is.
Fuel. Any further questions, Jim?
Just perhaps to officers, I noticed that there are on pages 35 and 36 of the agenda, and this is part of the audit report. There's a reference to the uncorrected misstatements. So they have decided that this recognition of a loss on sale of assets, the way that's been dealt with, is a misstatement because it's had a material impact on the balanced budget benchmark. Our explanation for not correcting it is that more guidance and clarity regarding the accounting treatment of this transaction will be forthcoming from the sector. I presume that's the local government sector, before adopting the long-term plan. And I also just wonder why, or whether we think that on the next page, the misstatements regarding matters 1 and 2 are immaterial.
Which page are you on, Jim?
On the agenda, 35 and 36.
So that's page 20 of your report, Derek. So uncorrected misstatements, the 331 we've spoken about. So that was at the consultation document stage, and we've fixed that in the long-term plan. And then the next ones, so council officers felt that the 500K odd of non-trading losses disclosed as negative expenses were not material to adjust. That was quite late in the piece that was picked up. It's consistent with our previous accounting treatment. Our annual report also has non-trading gains and losses all just like netted off as an expense. So we just left that one there, agreed that it was immaterial to move. And then points 2 and 3, depreciation. There's a slight difference in the auditor's calculation of what depreciation should have been versus what we had. And point 3 is the intangible assets one again. So yeah, at the end of the day, we decided they all kind of not material for adjusting at that stage of the document. It was getting close to 30 June and we wanted to sign off by the legislative deadline.
All right. Any other feedback or comments on the report itself?
Jim, maybe just one comment in relation to the LTP amendment, if there is any. There is currently legislation, I think, in a bill that would indicate that it will not be necessary for an audit of an LTP amendment if it relates to transfer of water assets. So maybe just to clarify that as well.
Well, that's positive news. Thank you, Derek. It's good to hear. Look, if there are no other comments on the report itself, could I ask somebody move that we receive it, please? Moved by Mayor Kircher, seconded by Deputy Mayor Halale. All those in favour? Against? Thank you, that's carried. We'll now move on to agenda item 4.2, which is the sticky topic, and that is audit costs and LTP fee recovery. And so I'll hand over to Amanda and Paul to speak to this in a minute, but I'd just like to say, Derek, at the outset that I have always been very clear with you that if we start to run into some potential cost overruns, or if you're having any trouble with any staff in terms of getting what you need, I have always been incredibly clear that you are to come to me and we are to discuss that. Not once have you and I had a conversation on this, and you are talking here about a 450% time overrun in terms of what audit needed to put into this. So I'm expressing my extreme disappointment in that radio silence, and I'll hand over to Amanda to talk to it now.
Okay, so this report kind of covers two aspects. There is the long-term plan request for further fee recovery of 88,000, and also I've given a bit of a historic picture of our audit fees for the long-term plan and also the annual report over about the last 10 years. So the agreed fee from the outset for the audit of the long-term plan was $102,100. And the auditors are currently seeking to recover a further $88,182 for costs that they believe they've had to do extra work, unforeseen work on top of what they planned to do for the audit of our long-term plan. So the Council's Chief Executive and I met with Derek 2 weeks ago to discuss this matter. Agreement couldn't be reached. Derek took it back, discussed it with the Office of the Auditor General, and we've since received this other attached letter to carry on fee negotiations. We feel that the full 88 is not warranted. Obviously, there is some areas where there has been some extra audit work and the qualifications that were unforeseen. But yeah, the degree of the fee we're not comfortable with. There is another meeting scheduled between Chief Executive and I and Derek next Monday to discuss it further, which will be interesting. And then, yeah, in terms of Derek can speak more on his letter about that fee overrun, but in terms of the long-term picture of audit fees, you can see that table, the annual report audit is getting highly significant. And we're looking at a $316,000 audit fee for the annual report audit coming up very soon, starts in the next couple of weeks. Which is a huge increase in previous years, and that's already with a discount of $32,000 off it as well. So audit fees are pretty significant in terms of council's overall operating costs. So I just wanted to bring that to council's attention and take the time to ask Derek what we need.
Thank you. And for those of you that haven't done the math yet on that table on page 41, what we're highlighting there is that since 2015, the council's audit has cost the ratepayers of the Waitaki district close to $2 million. And also important to note, Amanda, you mentioned the $88,000 cost overrun, but as Derek and the team have highlighted, that only represents 25% of what they think the actual overrun was. If I look at the table on page 46, at the bottom of that table, that suggests that the 88,000 is charging for circa 360 hours of additional time. If I do the math on that and add the other 75% on, that comes out at almost 1,600 hours, which by my basic math works out that somebody spent 36 weeks full time on the extra work associated with this audit. Derek, I'm going to hand it to you now before I get a bit too fired up, actually.
Thanks, Simon. Yes, so I mean, as we've indicated, there were certain areas that required additional work. Receiving nine copies of the financial model and 7 copies of the LTP, or 7 versions of the financial model and 9 versions of the LTP throughout the process. Every time you get a new copy and update it, you have to go through it, make sure that everything ties up. And we continuously found errors throughout the documents. There were also a lot of the assumptions that needed to change that we identified. So there were multiple pages of misstatements through the documents that we've identified. And if those weren't corrected, it would have led to multiple qualifications throughout the LTP and the CD. Furthermore, there was a lot of work in terms of writing up papers that had to go to art review in relation to the matters that we identified. Originally, for the LTP, we had a qualification on the intangible assets as well. Until it got corrected, we had to write up papers regarding the accounting treatment for the transfer of the Three Waters assets to the CCO. So all of that requires additional time. And ultimately, that additional time, we've set that out in the letter, as well as provided a breakdown of the areas in which we've spent the additional time on.
All right, look, I don't think nobody's questioning the fact that this LTP and CD process that we've all gone through has been trickier and longer and harder than some in the past, and it did create additional work for all parties. I know Amanda and Paul may want to speak back to this, but with regard to the 9 versions of tools and 7 financial models and other bits and pieces, I understand that when council staff handed those back to you, they were very clear about the areas where change had been made and areas that you needed to focus on. So it would not have been my expectation that you would be required to go through the entire documents or models again from start to finish at
Yes,
each iteration.
Maybe again, that assumption is wrong for the sake that we, from the onset, council did inform us that the financial model was prepared on the old organogram, and we noted that it will require us to relook at the whole financial model once it's received for the LTP stage, because it was then prepared on the new organogram. And for us to express an opinion on the CD stage, we had to audit it at that point in time, and then physically had to relook at everything come the LTP stage, because it was starting from scratch essentially. And throughout the process, we were clear with council that that was going to be necessary.
Sorry, it started from scratch every single one of the 9 times.
No. Between the CD stage and the LTP stage, because normally you'd only audit the changes that were made, or in terms of the preferred options, and normally in most instances the preferred options are adopted. In this instance, the whole financial model changed, the way in which it was constructed, and therefore we had to relook at the whole financial model from scratch.
All right, Amanda.
So the situation he's talking about there is from the consultation document. The financials that we provided were under the old organisation structure, and we were still working through changing our general ledger and working out our new groups of activities under the new ways of working with the new org structure. That the only last group was stood up in March. So yeah, it's been bad timing that it's all this change has happened through. But I guess the conversation that we'll have next week, Derek, is looking at the hours. For that line, I'm talking about, his paper mentions 189 hours spent on those changes. Whereas a lot of those departments, it was for example, democracy and accountability is simply a name change to support services. So that wouldn't take any extra time. Those departments still match up similarly. And then your 3 waters are still disclosed separately under legislation as they were in the previous ways of working and now, and same with roading. So I don't believe the degree of change was that significant, requiring that degree of hours. Like, I concur that there was extra hours put in because of that significant change in org structure, but it's just the level, like the total hours, and the 88,000 is not what we expected.
I think we all agree with that, right? We're all here saying that it was trickier, that there was more work, that there were, you know, that it wasn't as efficient as it could have been. But 4 weeks of someone's FTE to go through the structural changes to the
Well,
organisation.
I think
Oh,
cumulatively,
come
I think you
on. And
underestimate.
Derek, stop, let me finish. And for you to have never picked up the phone and connected with me to let me know that this was happening is indefensible. I've been very clear with you that I expected you to call me and to connect with me if you were having any of these such issues. Not once. Nothing?
I mean, I agree. I didn't connect with you during the time. I mean, it was at the final stage of the audit, so it was a lot of pressure
Okay, come
trying to
on.
get everything done.
390 hours of additional work did not happen at the final stages of the audit. That is incorrect. You've known all along that this has been happening. Not once have you connected with me. Jim, you had something to say?
Yes, I did. I'm in awe of your intensity, and I salute you for it. I had a question, a particular question about one of the identified additional hours, and it relates to the matter that's just been discussed. The biggest increase in hours is 189 hours and 15 minutes that appears to have been required because, according to the audit explanation, information required to conduct the audit was not available. Note those words, please. And or complete and provided in accordance with the agreed timelines. Now, if information is not available or it is not delivered in accordance with an agreed timeline, you cannot spend hours on assessing material that isn't there to be assessed. So if the material wasn't available, then effectively the only hours that apply are those that kick in when the material becomes available. And all we actually have in that instance, and also in the instance where material is not provided in accordance with agreed timelines, is a time shift. In other words, what I'm suggesting is I would like Audit to explain how they can create 189 hours and 15 minutes of additional time processing documents that in the first instance weren't available or didn't get to them in an agreed time, at an agreed time. It seems to me, as a matter of logic, that the absence of information also presupposes the absence of hours, and that 189.15 is, in fact, untenable. Well, I'm just wondering if there's any comment.
The portion that you're reading is the criteria that the OAG sets out for qualifying criteria to be able to assess whether there's additional fees that can be recovered. Our explanation is the one on the right-hand column, and there we specify the reasons for why we spent the 189 hours. We don't make reference to the fact that we looked at information that wasn't available.
It's all right, Joe. We can go around in circles on this, right? It's all we're going to do. If we're going down and we're questioning individual hours, we're not going to get anywhere with that
I accept
discussion.
that, except that it's a public document. The global explanation as to why, yes, there is specific references on the right-hand side of the column on page 45. And heaven alone knows how much additional time would have been taken to work out who's providing funding for the Forester Gallery extension and the like. We won't quibble about that. But the point is, as a matter of logic, the explanation given on the left is in fact a non sequitur. You can't spend hours assessing documents you don't have. And all that explanation on the left demonstrates is that certain material reached audit at a different time than had been initially expected. And that, in my view, renders the whole 189 hours and 15 minutes null and void.
Yeah, well, I guess Derek would argue that they could put some more explanation around the left-hand side to explain what the hours. Tim, did you have a question?
Oh yeah, I just wanted to ask a question just to clarify some earlier comments that were made. I'm just trying to reconcile the letter back to the 2025 LTP audit table that sets out the the overrun hours as stated. Yeah, currently 359 hours at a total of 88,182. So that works out at a charge out rate of 245 an hour. If you go to the letter, it sets out again that 88,182. But then the last sentence says, I note you're seeking to recover approximately 25% of the cost overrun. So what I'm trying to ascertain is the table setting forward in either an hours based or dollars based 25% of what the overrun was, or is the letter stating that you are seeking to recover 25% of the 88,000?
No, the 88,000 is the 25%.
So this goes to the heart of my maths before, Tim, where if the hours that are set out are 389 hours and that's 25% of the total time spent, then that's 1,200 hours, which by my maths is 36 weeks of somebody's life. Right? The 189 hours is
in total, we spend around
you can see why we're struggling with this, Derek.
in total, we spend around 1,800 hours on this job.
Derek, would it be possible to obtain all the timesheets and records of everything? Because I mean it's inconceivable the amount of time that's been put forward here.
I think you can appreciate our emotion with this, Derek, right? This is, if you were my builder, I would have sacked you, but I can't sack you because you're the only person who can build my house. I don't have anybody else to go to. Our ratepayers have paid almost $2 million in the past 10 years for audit fees. We're looking at a $300,000 fee for next year. I think it's perfectly within their rights to be able to understand where that 1,800 hours at $245 an hour was spent. So we're not going to get any. We're not going to get any
that
further.
analysis, and that is the analysis that we've provided. I mean, at the same token, we are also accepting that there were inefficiencies on our side. It's probably a 50-50 in terms of the additional hours that we spent that are inefficient compared to the hours that we are recovering. And then it's not the total overrun, that's a total amount that's spent on the project in totality, the 1,800 hours. It's not 1,800 hours overrun. So we're looking at 600 hours that was over budget, and 300 of that is our inefficiencies or additional work that was required, and then 300 hours contributing to council, is council's contribution.
Gary?
As we get into the detail, it becomes even more intriguing. I just wonder, Derek, like, how do you work out that inefficiency on either party's part? Is it just like, well, this is the total extra time, we'll say split it in half, or actually is there a bit of science behind that? Just to get to understand, what do you class as inefficient on our part, or extra time caused by us versus extra time caused by your systems and people?
Yes, thanks, Gary. So staff keep a detailed timesheet of every activity that they work on, and then when they capture their timesheet, they will indicate whether that's as a result of the client, or whether they incurred those inefficiencies because it took them longer to do something specific than what was originally expected. So it is we do analyze time spent by staff member line by line in terms of the activities that they spend on.
All right. Anybody else got anything to say? No. Can I ask then that someone move that we... Oh, sorry, Hannah.
Thank you. Thank you, Derek, for joining in to help us understand the additional work that was undertaken. I think I have a clearer understanding of it, and I'm supportive of Mayor Kircher and our chair's comments in terms of the process, that it would have been much better if it had been communicated a lot sooner, so then we can renegotiate some of the terms that were outlined in the engagement letter. I'm just wondering if there's an opportunity for us to extend some kind of goodwill in terms of helping to close this off, because it does represent material cost to the council and a significant burden to our ratepayers, particularly at this time. So if there is an opportunity to try and write off, like a significant percentage of that additional fee, we would be requesting for you to reconsider that. So I guess that's in our interest. It is around the burden of the to the ratepayer, because it was unknown. So we'd be requesting you to just revisit and take that into consideration, whether there's an opportunity for us to kind of reconsider, extend some kind of goodwill, because we know that we do need to continue to work with you and your office and your staff, but be a lot more transparent in terms of what our process and things are moving forward. So we would appreciate, like just that opportunity for us to kind of take 5 and just reconsider whether there is an extension for you to consider writing something off for the goodwill of our community. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. That was very nicely said. Can I ask someone move that we accept the paper? Moved by Councillor Hopkins, seconded by Mayor Kircher. All those in favour? Against? Thank you, that's carried. Thank you, Derek.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, I just want to make a wee quick comment, and that's obviously this is an audit for the annual reports, and we've got on page 41 the table of costs over the last 10 years, and it is significant. But when we get asked by our community, what do we get for our rates? The wee bit of assurance that this process gives them hopefully is appreciated. But equally, I just want to point out that this is not the only costs for audit that we pay out, that we pay out various amounts for different parts of auditing. We also have our CCOs, which are required to pay out audit costs for those processes. So it does all come at a very hefty cost overall to our community. I just want to make that note, because some people just don't realise how significant this cost is.
Thank you. Not to mention the internal costs that Amanda and Paul and the teams all bear as well on behalf of the ratepayers to be able to provide information and comply with these. All right, let's move on to agenda item 4.3, being page 47. And Amanda, I'll hand over to you again. So this is agenda item 4.3, the audit report on the findings from the FY25 interim audit.
Okay, so our 25 financial year just finished on 30 June 2025. The audit of our annual report will take place very soon, but the auditors also come in during during the year and complete what they term an interim audit, where they kind of look at the systems and controls that we have in place and do any initial audit work that they can to make their audit at the final stage a lot more smoother. So this report from Derek, which I'm sure he'll speak to as well, highlights the areas that they considered and any improvements that they think the council needs to put in place. I've highlighted, bullet pointed them there. And then also outlines the next steps that they'll take place, the key areas that they're going to focus on in the final audit as well. So I feel that we have made good headroom on previous audit recommendations, and there'll be significant improvement by the time the auditors come and complete their final checks at the final audit that starts on the 22nd of September. And I don't have any concerns to raise at this point.
So it was going to be my question just before I hand it over to Derek, Amanda, is that between you and Paul and the team, there's none of those bulleted points that are highlighted here that you have concern with or disagreement with regard to the way the audit's proposed?
No, I agree with the key areas of focus. Obviously, the valuation of infrastructure assets is a key one that happens every year. Those are in train at the moment. They'll be pulled into the annual report that we provide to the auditors. And fair value assessment when it's a non-revaluation year. So in this case, that's our three waters, which is highly material. Group consolidation is always a big one. Part of that is the wind up of Waitaki District Health Services, which the auditors have been kept in the loop with all the way through the process. Change in payroll system, which they focused on at their interim audit, and they haven't raised any concerns about in their interim audit report. Override of controls is always a key area. There's an amendment to the disclosure of audit fees, which should be pretty simple to tick off. The risk pool scheme is an area of focus each year. Local water's done well. The water reform, we will keep them up to date with whatever the current status is at that point in time. In your report, I'm guessing we'll need to have some very clear disclosure about where we're sitting with our plans for Three Waters going forward. And benchmark reporting, fraud risk and legislative compliance is kind of standard areas of focus each year. So I agree with the areas that they've highlighted that they'll work on, and I don't have any concerns from council's point of view.
Thank you. Derek, would you like to speak to it?
Thanks, Simon. Yes, just to reflect on the area in terms of our current progress, we did identify some areas in terms of work that we would like to bring forward. We just couldn't complete all the work in those areas as identified in the report, specifically relating to FTE testing, as well as some of the expenditure testing we couldn't complete. We did, however, complete work on key projects relating to the Waitaki Event Centre and the Coastal Landfill Site Remediation Project, so that we could bring forward and do some substantial testing on those areas. So we'll need to go back to the areas that are still open that we had anticipated to complete during the interim audit. So again, as Amanda reflected, we have a draft to bring as much work forward as possible during the interim, so that it does lead to a smoother year-end process, and that we address all significant issues up front, so that there are no unknowns come the final stages of the audit. From a control environment perspective, we can confirm that we are satisfied with the control environment, and then we've also just followed up on prior recommendations.
Thank you. So that's great to hear. So at this stage, you don't foresee any areas that will potentially require significant additional work?
No, Chair. Maybe just to mention that in terms of timing, the audit of Waitaki District Health Services Limited was delayed because Council made a submission to the Office of the Auditor General to have the CCO be not auditable, although that will only be for the next year, it being an exempt CCO. That will only be for next year, but while they were doing that assessment, the audit was put on hold. So I know the auditors of the component will only restart the audit quite soon. So that might have an impact on our year-end delivery.
Why was it put on hold when none of us were questioning the requirement for Waitaki District Health Services to be part of the FY25 audit, and that the letter to the Auditor General was only for FY26 on? So none of us were contesting the fact that for FY25, Waitaki District Health Services would be, as it has historically, part of the audit.
Looking at the email trail, there was emails coming from Waitaki saying it needs to be put on hold until clarification is sought from the Office of the Auditor General.
Amanda, Paul, I don't feel that was ever.
I'm not familiar with that. As far as we're concerned, the 25 financial audit was underway and going to take place as planned.
Yeah, we can take.
I'll send through those emails.
Okay, if you send those through, that would be good, because I'm a little surprised by that as chair of Waitaki, as chair of Waitaki District Health Services.
As a result, that
I
audit was put on hold.
fully expecting that it would be a full audit for FY25. So if you could send through those, that would be great. Thank you. Sorry, Derek, do you have anything further to add before I open the floor up to questions?
No.
Okay, any questions?
Yeah, I have one for audit and one for our officers. Derek, you mentioned the work that you couldn't do or were unable to complete, the planned interim testing on expenditure transaction listing and the FTE report. And you've said you're going to have to come back to that. So is that going to be another additional cost item that will be made available to us? That's a question for you guys. The question.
Let's let Derek answer that one first then.
Yes, we haven't done the cost analysis yet. I can do that and provide an update on that.
Thank you. Your second question?
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so just looking at going to page 61 of the agenda, there's a reference to two things at the very end. One of them is the seismic assessment report that was originally proposed or recommended by Audit to be done in 2021. And then you've got this revenue matter that was originally suggested 9 years ago in 2016. I can understand perhaps the unexplained water losses in 2019 taking a reasonable time to resolve. And I know we are working on that, but I'm just curious to know, first of all, do we have a program through property or one of the other council departments of initiating seismic assessment reports on all our buildings? And if so, how's it coming? And this idea about including standard terms and conditions on non-rates invoices, is that financially significant? And if it is, why haven't we done something about it?
Yeah, so I think that's a good question, Jim, but I think the revenue one comes up every year because it obviously stays on the auditor's radar as something that would be useful to do. But Paul or Amanda, do you want to speak to that? My understanding is that it was relatively insignificant and quite tricky to do the revenue, if we talk to the revenue issue first. Paul?
Yeah, I mean, it is something that we have looked at in the past. And yeah, it was seen as of little benefit. We do have it in place for the basically water billing, which is by far the largest income stream, but it's also things like a building consent. It's like we can't turn down customers. The thing is, we don't choose our customers, and therefore, it's a bit of a challenge sometimes to impose extra conditions on them when, we are the only person that can supply services to them. So, and plus, as we've shown in previous PAR reports, we actually have a very high collection, level of collection. You know, people need to pay building consents in advance. They need to pay deposits on resource consents. You know, so probably the next biggest income stream is something like the aquatic centre, where it's basically if you don't pay, you don't get into the facility. So it's really, you know, well, it's like, yeah, we could look at it eventually, but it would be of marginal benefit, yeah, especially given the collection levels that we do have.
And low on the priority list in terms of the utilisation of staff, time and resourcing. And the seismic assessment report?
That's been done on a risk basis. You know, every council structure and building, I've again seen in other reports, we have an extensive portfolio. So it was done more on a risk basis, particularly public buildings. I think they've all been done, but, you know, getting down to like seismic assessments of, you know, single
Pumping stations and
well, yeah, pumping stations, but even, you know, single story community housing, you know, very, very low earthquake risk attached to some of those things. So it's like, yeah, we've done more on a risk basis rather than a universal basis.
thank you. I'm comfortable with both of those. Jim?
Just a supplementary though, having mentioned community housing, what percentage of our total property portfolio still remains to be assessed? I mean, it's very heartening to hear that all the public buildings have been done. Is anyone able to say we've still got 30% of everything we own to check and, or is that information available?
Not at this meeting, but it's something we could, you know, circulate to the elected members.
Thank you. Any further questions? No. Or you do? Come on, Councillor McKine.
Well, it's just a comment over the whole general thing, and we have two regulatory systems that are, we have no choice. It's a one-stop shop, and yes, you must have accountability. But I'm actually astounded at how much expense has gone on time on our staff and the audit department on providing availability on assumptions of what's going to happen rather than what is happening, and the cost of that will put a hell of a lot of pipe in the ground to fix a lot of roads. And I think we've gone too far. So while we must have accountability, that clock's got to be wound back because this is ridiculous.
Thank you. I think that's probably a sentiment shared by many and something I've made abundantly clear throughout the course of today's meeting. So I apologise for my passion at times. But if there are no further questions, could I ask somebody to move that we receive agenda item 4.3, please? Moved by Councillor Blacklist, seconded by Councillor Hopkins. All those in favour? Against? Thank you. That's carried. And thank you. Do we need Derek for 4.4? No, look, thank you, Derek. Thank you for your time and your understanding and your feedback today. And I look forward to hearing how discussions go next week with you, Alex and Amanda. And as always, quite happy to join those if it adds any value. Thank you.
Simon. Thanks, committee members. Cheers.
All righty. Agenda item 4.4, Amanda. Verbal update on annual report, including valuations.
Yeah, so we are madly working on the preparation of the 30 June 25 annual report. I brought the draft results to the PAR last committee meeting, and there's not really any significant movement on those. We'd done a lot of our accruals and year-end adjustments at that point. So I kind of wanted to touch on where we're at with the valuations. The roading revaluation is in its final stages now. I don't have the movement, the figures to bring at today's meeting, but you'll see a draft of the annual report at the next PAR committee meeting that will include the movement and roading assets for this financial year. The forestry valuation has been received and is being reviewed at the moment. Land and buildings is in progress. That's quite a huge process that we go through every 3 years to look at all our land and building holdings across the whole district. So we'll have a figure on that next month as well. And also that I mentioned earlier, the 3 waters are not subject to valuation this year, but we do a fair value assessment. So look at like the current indices and whether there has been a material movement, so we can satisfy the auditors that the value we put in our 30 June 25 annual report is not significantly different to what it would have been if it had been revalued in full. So that's the process we're working on at the moment. As Derek mentioned, his audit team likes to bring work forward as much as possible. So they are budgeted to come in the week of the 8th of September to look at all of our performance reporting. So that's all been drafted. That involves all departments across the organisation. A lot of it's like our resident opinion survey results. There's a lot of measures around how Waters is performing, roading, and other various areas around the organisation. So that's all been drafted and put into the annual report format. It's actually sitting with the senior management team for review at the moment, and we were going to put it in convene, if you would like, could put it in convene at the end of this week so that you can have a look at what's going to go to the auditors on the 8th of September. So that's the whole front end section of the annual report to do with, tells our performance story for each of the departments. In the past, we have had qualifications from the auditors in two of these areas. One is to do with our road smoothness measure. So I just want to highlight that we're still taking the same approach this year. So we will get the same qualification. We expect to get the same qualification from the auditors around how we measure road smoothness. And also water loss. It's something they've qualified in the past around the process that we use to capture, like to record how much water loss we have. We haven't had a very good process at measuring that in the past. We've improved our process this financial year. Our measure is not achieved, obviously, because we have a significant water loss in this district, but we're hoping that because the process has been improved, so we're more accurately reporting that qualification won't exist in the audit report at the end of the year, but we won't know until we get to that point in time. So I think it'd be quite helpful to share that information, kind of break up the annual report a wee bit. We'll put that in convene at the end of this week. That'll go to audit on the 8th of September. And then on the 22nd of September, the auditors come back and they can mainly concentrate on the financials, which a big area of focus will be these revaluations.
Thank you. Sounds like a very efficient way of trying to do things, which is what we're all looking for. And I guess if we can reduce the to and froing around those qualifications, it's got to be a good thing. Tim?
Thanks. Just with the road smoothness qualification, is that the reason that it'll be the same outcome this year? Is that because we have a different approach that we're choosing to keep adopting, or we haven't got around to implementing whatever change needs to be made? And then with respect, you mentioned earlier about the land and buildings. Could you just elaborate on that process a little bit more and what that entails? And is it just council-owned land and buildings, or? Yeah, okay.
Yep. So for the road smoothness, it's kind of a bit of both. There's some areas that we probably could do a bit more. It's to do with the amount and the way that the amount of testing that we do throughout the year. So we rely on our contractors to undertake those tests. So yeah, we could, there's some improvements that we could make, and yeah, haven't had the capacity to do so far. Not highest on the priority list. And yeah, in terms of land and buildings, it's absolutely all of the council owned land and buildings. The council's policy to revalue land and buildings this financial year and every 3 years is across our whole group. So Whitestone Contracting, Waitaki District Health Services, all of them complete the review of the valuation of their land and buildings this year as well. But this process that we're doing right now just concerns our land and buildings. Our starting point is tidying up our register to make sure that we've got all of our assets for the year in there. So there's things that are ongoing, Forester Gallery, Event Centre, just making sure that we've booked them accurately at that certain point in time at 30 June. Then we give all of that data to our whole database, to the valuers to independently check over. And we get reliant on independent cost indices from external experts, and then they pull together a full valuation report and give us a dollar value that we book in our annual report. Is that enough detail?
Yeah, no, that's great. Thanks. So the reason for doing that approach is because that gives you a more actual estimate of the value as opposed to using like a quotable value estimate.
Yep, so quotable value is kind of for a different purpose, but there's a wide range of valuers that we can use, and the auditors will scrutinise the valuer that we use as well. And they've got their own specialists that can review to make sure that the valuation that we receive is fairly representative of the value of our assets at that time. The valuer values other councils and other similar entities and has that market knowledge. And Audit New Zealand will review those to ensure that it's consistent with what other councils' indices and results that they're getting as well. So there's a lot of independent checks that happen.
Thank you. All righty. Thanks, Amanda. Any other questions? Nope. Then I'll ask somebody move. Oh, sorry, you did have a question? Would you like to make a statement? You sure? Go on.
No, thank you for that, Amanda. I was going to ask about how you do get a valuation on those things, because there's some pretty big ticket items in what we're talking about. So I've got 2 or 3 questions on the side of that. Does it identify land and buildings that aren't paying their way, or does it highlight what's going on in that? You know, what I'm getting at, when these valuations are done, can we pick that up and then run with it and actually get a process that starts removing those things that are actually costing us rather than being beneficial? And secondly, road smoothness, I don't understand what that's got to do with the auditor, because that comes back to money that the NZTA provides and road health. And if you haven't got any money, you can't have smooth roads. So you've either got potholes or you've got smooth roads. So I don't understand why we're getting down the weeds with those sort of things with the audit department, which comes back to what I said before.
What was it? Blank. What was the first question? The valuation.
No, well, the question, do we, I guess John's question is, if through the valuation process we're identifying properties that are financially not performing, then do we put them in, do we then take that as part of our property portfolio and look at what we do with them?
Yeah, so it's not specifically part of the process, but this is really good information that we can use for that going forward. So our property team will have the most accurate valuation data at the time. You'll recall when we went out in our consultation document for the long-term plan, the data that we used was the 23 financial year valuations, which were a bit out of date. I think they might have even been quotable value. So they weren't highly accurate. So yeah, now we'll have the best information we've got at the time for what the value was at 30 June 25, and we can make more informed decisions about whether those assets are paying their way. But yeah, in terms of, I guess, like to note for property, they also have specific valuations undertaken to work out what the market rent and things would be as well. This is a separate valuation under accounting standards. So there's slightly different valuations for different purposes as well. So
We feed it into our insurance
yeah, it's all important information.
strategy and bits and pieces as well. And the second question was just around road smoothness.
Yeah, so that's a legislative measure that all councils have to complete. So that's why the auditors focus on it, and the specific rules about how it's measured, and just to make sure that we're all comparing apples with apples. So it's a really important measure for the public.
We're going to turn it into a competition. So we'll have the best water in New Zealand competition, and we'll have the smoothest road in New Zealand competition. And we won't let those folk north of us win again. All right.
Thank you for that, Simon.
Jim.
And just a question about that. There was a reference in the report, was some of the audit reports, to this Waka Kotahi's or NZTA's, as it is now, assessment of smoothness and so on. Do I take it from what you've just said that NZTA/Waka Kotahi have a means by which road smoothness is measured that we have chosen not to apply, knowing that it nevertheless is the standard? And if that is the case, is the reason for that cost related?
Yeah, so it's similar to Tim's question before. There's an element of that. Yeah, so we rely on our contractors to perform those measures for us throughout the year. So yeah, we could undertake a lot more at a higher cost.
But okay, sorry, just
I think Paul had something to
Yeah,
add.
sorry, just because it was directly related to that, but I suppose, yeah, that the outcome of that measure and the comment by audit is not really impacting our relationship with Waka Kotahi. They're still, very happy with the asset management processes that council is undertaking and all of the quality processes. So it's sort of a bit of an anomaly that it's more of a concern in the annual report rather than the actual service delivery and levels of service being delivered by the roading team and our contractors on the assets, which you'd think, that's sort of the important piece, not a measure that is probably, a national measure that's probably usually more relevant for urban settings than rural and provincial.
Thank you. And speaking of roading and smoothness, welcome Councillor Thompson to the chamber. You had another question, Jim.
Just to be clear, when our contractors do this work that we ask them to do they apply the NZTA formula, or are they using a different measure or means of assessing smoothness that isn't predicated on an urban model?
Sorry, you're now getting into a wee bit too much detail for finance focused people.
Yeah,
look, we can get a wee bit more detail on that and circulate.
Yeah, but let's lift ourselves from those smoothness weeds. And if I could ask, if there's no further comments, could I ask somebody please move that we expect we receive Amanda's update? Moved by Councillor McKone, seconded by Councillor Blackler. All those in favour? Against? Thank you. And again, that's carried. As mentioned before, I did ask whether anybody wished to go into public excluded to discuss the minutes, and because nobody thought it necessary to do so, we can bypass agenda items 5, 6, and 7, and I can now declare the meeting closed. Thank you to all of those online and in the chambers, and enjoy the remainder of your day.